Okay, should we roll?
Yeah.
All right. Good morning, everyone, even in the back. My name is Lindsay, and I'm the session monitor. So I have the privilege of being with you all this morning and giving you, probably during the break is what I'm thinking, but the workshop evaluation, I'll just set it in your place. And if at the end of our time together today, I'll just stand in the back, you can hand them to me before you head out. That would be great. But I have the privilege of introducing Andre. Up here is Koen, is that correct?
Correct.
Andre Koen, and I'm going to let him take the floor from there, because if you've ever been in this workshop before, he's very dynamic and interesting, and I think we'll have a lot of fun this morning together. So he has lots of great information to share. So welcome, Andre. Welcome, all of you. A round of applause.
How many of you have been in a session that I've conducted before? So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay, cool. Well, those of you who have been in a session I've done before, hopefully you can tell me if I've grown a little bit since the last time we've been together. So my name is Andre Koen, and for the last 2 years, I have been living the American dream. I've been consulting full-time, feeding myself, and helping the world be a better place around diversity and inclusion issues. I teach at Bethel University as an adjunct professor. I am also a faculty member of Adler Graduate School, which is in Richfield. It's a psychology school. I taught high school for 8 years. 4 of those 8 years also teaching middle school. And many of the things that I am presenting to you today are things that my students taught me. Because I thought I knew how to teach until I tried to put it into action. And so they helped me learn how to be a better teacher, better facilitator, and ultimately, I think, a better person. And so we obviously have handouts, and if you haven't picked some of those up in the back, I also have some up front that I can run to you. We have handouts. I have a PowerPoint presentation, which means I'm a professional. And so I have things that I want to talk about. And they should be right at that table, right on the corner of that table. If we run out, I certainly have more. And so, more importantly than the things that I want to talk about, I'm curious as to why you selected this particular workshop, and what do you hope we'll talk about, and what do you hope we won't talk about? All right? So what were some of your hopes in coming to this particular session that you hoped we would talk about, or maybe some things that you're just tired of hearing? So what were some of those things? And I'll jot some of that stuff down. So why this session? Yes.
I was hoping we would have just some other ideas to bring in, all types of youth in our work, whether it's people of different backgrounds, or youth or different organizations.
Okay. So how do we bring different youth with all sorts of diversity into our organization, be it from other countries, be it outside of the gender binary, all of those pieces. Okay? Yes?
My hope is that professionals helping me work together towards racial equity while intentionally or unintentionally putting another culture down.
Okay. So how do we reach racial equity without putting another culture down? And I will say that that's a tricky balance, because typically we think about it as a seesaw, right? So if I do things over here, then that either raises someone or lowers someone. And are people familiar with the concept of racial equity? Or sort of, kind of? Okay. What is equality? When someone says, we are fighting for equality, what does that mean, equality? The same, equal, right? So I'm looking for equal access to goods, jobs, services, and money, so I'm looking for equal rights. But when we talk about equity, equity is a little bit different, because equity is equal rights, but actually getting people what they really need. For example, have you ever been to a public gathering of some sort, be it a baseball game or a football game or even at the state fair? Anyone been in those large group gatherings, right? When people have to relieve themselves, when they have to go to the restroom, what are the lines for men like? What are the lines for women like? It's equal. There are 6 porta potties for men and there are 6 porta potties for women. But is there equity in that particular system? No. Because women don't get the opportunity to they use bathrooms differently than men. I'm still trying to figure out what they use the little mailbox for and who has time to write a letter and who picks up the mail in the little mailbox. Okay, some of you know what I'm talking about. Okay. So thank you for bringing that up, because that will be some of the underpinnings that we're talking about. So we're not just talking about having equal access. For another example of that is the 1964 Civil Rights Act says that women and men have equal access to jobs, but we still do not have pay equity in those jobs. So although women can work side by side with men, they have equality, but they don't have necessarily equitable pay distribution, right? Although we're making some progress, because when I was in high school, women were making 65 cents to every dollar that a man makes. We've now moved up to 77 cents over the last 30 years, but I'm dating myself, I guess. And any other questions? Why did you select this particular session? What were you hoping to get? Yes, ma'am.
Well, and I'm a director of school. We have a very diverse population, and I think we're pretty good, but we're still, I think, mostly all around some cultural issues that I think they view intersectional health differently. And we're sure that again, equal is not because equal. So just kind of go through
Okay. So her question basically is that there are a number of different kinds of people coming. They have a different paradigm, a different way of viewing the world. How do we deal with that and adapt to that? And what is the latest and greatest technology? And I will tell you that I don't have a particular latest and greatest technology for that, because the thing that I know that works is very old. It's very classic. So we'll spend some time talking about that and see if that actually can be helpful in the work that you do. All right? Other folks, why did you guess?
I teach at a high school that one of our primary pieces and priorities right now is about cultural competence with our NUA program, and we have an increasing students of color population in our building. And I guess I would like, it's not really done. But I would like some ideas about how I can increase my credibility with some of the students that don't look like me.
Right.
Because I think sometimes, because I don't look like them, they don't think I can empathize or understand or reach and I'd like to try to get some strategies maybe or ways that I can do that.
Yeah. Do other folks have that problem sometimes, either with clients or with parents or even with community members, that sometimes they don't think that you can empathize with them because their situation is so unique? Right? So we'll talk about how to work with that. All right? So I'll hand over here. Yes, ma'am.
I run a sexuality performance event, the storytelling thing. Anyway, we've been doing it for about a year, and theoretically, it's an all-inclusive event, and I would like it to be as diverse as possible. But in practice, that's not really what's happening. And so it's been kind of a moment for me of like, okay, well then, what steps can I take to open
that this is something that they can participate in, that it has something to offer various communities as opposed to just like my community, which is relatively small.
So how do you open up your programs to be in function, diverse and inclusive, when in fact that's not happening? Okay, all right, cool. Yes?
So I work in a health clinic, attending mostly mental health care. And sometimes I feel like addressing equity is difficult to speak people maybe in 30 minutes. And while I feel like our interaction is striving towards inclusive equity, there's so much else out there in their lives that is not equitable at all. And it can be very overwhelming to realize that while in an interpersonal interaction, you might be trying to work towards hearing what their needs are and
Yeah.
meeting those needs, but there's so much going on that is absolutely no control over. So maybe how to not feel overwhelmed when you realize that there's something that's not being done or disadvantage to you.
Okay, cool. And I'll address part of that right now, because that's a problem that I had as a young man, right? So as a young man, I was heaven bent on changing the world. I was going to change the world, and it wasn't happening fast enough. So I was thinking about plans that I could create, like blowing up the White House. Or painting the White House black, So I was a Public Enemy fan, and so I was very, as a kid, and as I got older, what I started to figure out was that change takes a lot of time, and it's very process driven. And then I got to a point right around age 27 when I figured out that I wanted to change the world for the wrong reasons. I wanted to change the world so that I could be great. And then I started realizing that that's not my role. And so now on the other side of 40, I now recognize that my role is to play my part as best I can and then hand my baton off to the next person. And so even in those overwhelming odds, our job is to do the best we can in playing our role. What that also means is that I have to make sure that I'm up to the challenge. Because I can talk about being better than LeBron James, right? I'm a better basketball player, right? I had a nickname on the basketball court. They called me Priest. Because I would cross people. I can talk about those things, but we know that I'm as good as LeBron James. When? When do we know that? When I play, right? And so a lot of times we sometimes feel inadequate, and that's the feeling we should have, because that means we're conscious of our growth edge. We know that there's some things that we can explore, we can do better. It's the people who are arrogant enough to believe that they know the answers or that they've seen the situation before. Those are the people who scare me. Right? So we'll continue to address that as we go through this piece. Take care of yourself. I'll never forget, I did a session at Hennepin County, and a lady, very well-intentioned, woman was expressing her feelings, and she said, I'm a job coach for infant, and sometimes I get really upset because I know that my clients don't have anything to eat, and my husband wants to go out for dinner. And I feel really bad about that. Guess what I told this lady? You better go to dinner with your husband. Because if you feel bad about that, he will find somebody who doesn't. So we have to make sure we take care of ourselves. I mean, she was so caught up in all this drama. I was like, lady, clear up. So we have to make sure that we're full, and we have to know what we're full of, because our clients will tell us. They'll show us what we're full of. All right? Any other things people were hoping that we would discuss? Yes?
So our school district is just been kind of talking about folks just very institutional racism and dealing with, in particular, our district has an issue of dealing with African going to special ed and how we deal with folks who not already told, even having people having conversations talking about that we all have racist issues, we all have worked on things, and it's not easy. I don't know. It's just that sometimes it's kind of overwhelming, and yes, you have to take care of yourself and how to also start changing.
Yeah. And I'm going to simplify this whole thing for you, because it's not that complex. Right? So part of the issue why we're still wrestling with a lot of this stuff is that they've tried to make it so complex. Anti-racism versus white privilege versus internalized oppression versus critical race theory, liberation theory, blah, 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 blah. What I want to give you is an ancient technology that is very simple, and it will undo all of that stuff. I believe that those things are great. I think scholarly pursuits of how to undo those things and how we've gotten into those situations are important. At the same time, they have to be practical and stuff that we can actually use. And so hopefully I can give you some stuff today that you can use, not only for the work that you're doing, and not only for your clients, but for you personally. All right? That this can apply to you personally. All right, cool. Anything else? Because you guys have given me a lot of stuff on the menu. All right, so let's get to it. On the front of your handout, at the top of your handout, there are...
You have the extra?
Oh, yeah, definitely. All right, cool. Well, actually, those are not yours. Yep, that's okay.
That was great.
Yep, that's okay. This is the kind of stuff the teachers love. They love material. The first thing that I'd like you to do is, first of all, can you tell me about this black and white picture? What is that a picture of? Dinosaurs. All right. So why is it that dinosaurs are not around any longer? Why are dinosaurs no longer around? They're extinct. All right. So what caused their extinction? Now some people might argue that birds are a derivative of dinosaurs, and I'm not a scientist, so I won't fight against that. So that's acceptable. But those big, large creatures that used to roam the earth are no longer here, and why is that? Climate change. A meteor hit the earth, changed the atmosphere, so the context changed, and the dinosaurs could not adapt to that change in context. All right? So we're going to talk about this concept of context. So what I'd like you to do is I want you to create what is referred to as a genogram. And a genogram basically is kind of like your family tree, if you will. And what I'd like for you to do is I'd like for you to note relationships, Circles and squares represent people. And I want you to go back at least 3 generations. You can pick mother's side, father's side, pick generations. All right? And I want you to tell me any major life events that have happened in any of those generations. All right? So a birth would be a death, would be a major life event. Maybe something that's happened in the world that might have had a profound impact on your family. And we'll start with you, and I'll give you just about 3 minutes to create this chart for yourself. All right? So. Yes.
I am too.
So you're basically going to make a family tree. You are in the center of that.
I want my kids.
You can add your kids. We want your family. So kids, nephews, aunts, uncles, parents, grandparents. So create your family tree as best you can. And go back 3 generations. You can add aunts and uncles.
My dad just married his mother. That's the wrong line.
However you... We're in Minnesota, and Kentucky is a little different. But, just easy. So as best you can, 3 generations. Major life events might be, like I said, either birth or death, or maybe an addiction, maybe a graduation, higher education, could be some kind of trauma that happened in the family. To note those kinds of things as well. I can certainly give you another one if you want to start over, but you won't be tested. So you have the people, you have some major life things. Now I want you to think just a little bit about life lessons. What kinds of things did people in previous generations kind of pass on, either stories or ways of thinking about stuff, mottos, if you will. in our family, we ... This is how the Joneses do it. Whatever. Those types of things.
And you want to write those down?
Oh, yeah, just make a little note or something. Use a word or a phrase, or if anything comes up for you as you're doing that, make note of those things. And then the last thing that I want you to do is to denote experiences with groups outside of your family. So diverse experiences. What were some of folks' experiences as they either get closer to you or get past you, to your children, nieces, nephews, grandchildren? What are some of their diversity experiences? And here is the official last task of this particular activity. If you can put dates, years associated with the groups of people. So if you know roughly, it doesn't have to be exact dates,
I don't think I really understand.
Yep. So in terms of your grandparents, what era, what time period did your grandparents live in? Yeah, what kinds of things did they pass down in terms of thoughts or mottos or ways of thinking? Your last name is Wick?
Yeah.
Did you marry into Wick, or is that you married into Wick? Okay. And so, are there certain things that Wicks do? Now that you're part of that family, they say you got to do this like the Wicks do it, with the Wick. All right, so we'll stop right there. Now, I'm curious, as you were going through this exercise, you were looking at these things, were there things that came up for you that you think are interesting? Yes?
Well, as you were answering this question, most of my parents came from dysfunctional families. But on my mom's side, there's a lot of alcohol. And they were never close, either my mom or my dad were close to their families. But somehow they instilled in us, they were fun. My siblings were very close and keeping contact. All the things that they did. So even though the other piece of it, somehow they ended up being like that anymore. But they were changing. I never
Okay.
thought about them being there.
So your parents were change agents. They said, the stuff that we have been exposed to, we're going to make sure that our kids aren't exposed to, and that they will have good relationships with each other. So whatever came before them, they decided we'll stop with them. Okay? Cool. Other folks, what did you notice as you were doing this particular activity? Yes. So culturally, your network was a little smaller. Okay? Okay, for each generation. All right. Cool. Yes.
Well, I'm old, and despite my family's significant flaws, my family was very inclusive culturally. And really, it was a pretty dysfunctional family, but they really were very inclusive long ago. And that's something that I really appreciate, having grown up in.
All right. So outside of all of their other dysfunctions, they were at least very inclusive in their dealings with other folks. All right. Cool. Yes, ma'am.
I'm in school right now, so in my sociology class, we're doing something very similar. And I noticed this starting my paper, the difference in cultural experience from living with a parent and living with your mom. And the
Okay?
Any of the different.
All right, so seeing the differences even between siblings in terms of their experiences with the world and how they live in it. Okay? Cool. Other folks, yes.
That just reminds me, and I'm old too, but my dad is 93, and he was in World War II, and I didn't know most of my grandparents because they were all dead before I was born. But if I look at it from a cultural perspective, it was and is very white as you get to the older generations, and continues to be very white. And then you get to my generation, and I have 5 siblings, all of whom are older than me. We're very close, but everything we do is still very traditional. And I'm the only one in the family who, in their work life or professional life, experiences any diversity whatsoever. And then I look at the generation beyond them, all my nephews and nieces, and my daughter who lives in Memphis, and they're experiencing a whole different level of diversity and multiculturalism as they go through their lives. They branch out into that. So I'm not sure if I'm articulating this very well.
Doing well.
But as the younger generations come about, there's more multicultural awareness and acceptance. My niece brought her boyfriend home, who was African American, and it was like, wow. It wasn't looked down upon, but it was still an eyebrow raiser, like, oh, look at that. There was no putting him down or her down for that matter, but it was like, wow, look at that. There's people who look different than us in the world, and we can have significant, so it's just interesting to see that as the young people move through, there's more diversity in the world that they experience than the world I experienced growing up.
And given the nature of this conversation, I would suggest that change is due to the change in context. That the context has changed, therefore we start to see things a little bit differently, showing up in our personal relationships. It is my belief that context, and we do a lot of cultural competence training, but we don't do enough information about the context that these cultures are coming from. And one of the things I would submit to you is I can't know everything about every culture. I can't know all the taboos. I can't know all the greetings and speak all the languages. But if I have a good sense of the context that they're coming from, then I have a good sense of who I'm dealing with that's in front of me. Right? For example, people often are confused as to why Hmong have moved to the Twin Cities, why Hmong are coming to the United States. And you know what their confusion is? They don't recognize that we made a promise, we made a deal during the Vietnam conflict that we're now living up to that deal. Right? Folks get confused as to why the Liberians are moving to the United States. Without understanding the context, it will seem just odd to you that they would come to the United States. Why won't they go to another country? Because Liberians are our sons and daughters. The liberated slaves from President Monroe's time were sent back to Liberia to mess up the country. What it ended up starting is kind of a caste system and a division between the American slaves and the native Africans there that is problematic even to today. And so I say that in jest, but I also mean it in a real way. Right? So if we don't understand those contexts, then understanding the people becomes even more difficult for us to understand. All right? So there's that. Any other points that, and we'll come back to this in just a bit. Any other things that folks found of interest as they were looking through their own context? Because this is your context. As you're looking at your own context. Anything striking? Anything else? Yes.
Well, as Polly was talking and you're talking, I'm looking at my family. My great aunt and my grandma, that generation that are long dead now, but they all grew up, and my mom grew up in northeast Minneapolis, and I moved suburbs later, but when I was a teenager. But when I was growing up northeast, and especially lower northeast, there were all kinds of, they were just little neighborhoods. That's how my mom grew up. My mom was Polish, and that was the Polish neighborhood. And then we had, all these different neighborhoods. And I remember my great aunt telling me not to walk past the house with the sticks 2 doors down. You can't do that. And so I grew up on that type of family with all sorts of ethnic slurs, and it was just a matter of that's how it was.
That's how it was.
That is how it was.
Right.
And I'm like, oh, okay, but they have a cool monkey living in their house. I wanted to see that.
Monkey?
They did, yeah.
Context. It was a different context.
Yeah.
Can you see me walking in with a little monkey? Dressing them up in tuxedos. Oh, no, that's somebody else. That's somebody else. Context has been different, right? I'm sure that some of us have had family members who at some time referred to Brazil nuts by another name.
Yeah. We were hoping Dad would say that when.
Right?
Yep.
But are people familiar with what a Brazil nut is? A Brazil nut?
Yeah.
Okay, so it is like it's about the size of an orange wedge, and it looks like a piece of wood. It's very knotty and very dark and very hard. And the name that folks would typically call that, I would say basically any folks pre-1950 would refer to that, particularly white people. I don't know that in my family that my people ever called it, but they would refer to them as nigger toes. Nigger toes. And so, and we'll talk more about how do we deal with grandpa and grandma and aunts and uncles who still try to use that term, even though the context has changed. All right. So, all right, cool. So we will move on. I love technology, and I have a battle with technology because it's like working with animals and kids. It's hard to know when it's really going to do what it's supposed to do. So while I'm waiting on that, what I'd like you to do is let's talk a little bit about our American context. So if you can open up your handout. So why is it that we have the opportunity to have a conversation about diversity and cultural competence and all of that kind of stuff? Why do we even have the opportunity to have that kind of conversation? Because what? Because we're such a diverse nation. There are other diverse nations. Sweden is diverse. South Africa is diverse. Sweden is very diverse. Yep. The birth rate of native white Swedes is declining, while North Africans, Moroccans, and who else is in North Africa? Libyans is growing, and so that's a big concern that they're concerned that they won't have a good balance of native Swedes. But at any rate, so other nations are diverse. We're not the only diverse nation. So what gives us the opportunity, the right to have a conversation about diversity and inclusion and cultural competence? Yes, ma'am.
Well, we're a younger country, and we are, I'm just kind of talking by what you're saying, we're maybe losing sight of the earlier philosophies of our country because of diversity coming into the borders who don't know that beginning in America, don't necessarily have that availability to study that. So with that comes a shift all the way around, because now we're not knowing some of the cultures that are here and that are growing in population. So I'm thinking that might be a shift for us.
So that may in fact be a shift, but I would submit to you that even people who live here, were born here, have not read the Constitution of the United States since 8th grade.
It's also been taken out.
Right? I think that's a problem. And you said we have equal rights. What gives us equal rights? The reason we get to have this conversation about diversity and inclusion, and you have to hold any trainer that comes before you and says, I am a diversity trainer and I am blah, 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 and they have these credentials. If they don't bring you back to this one simple idea, then they are totally off base, in my opinion. It's the Constitution of the United States. It is what gives us the backbone to even have this conversation. Right? And so if we're not pointing folks when we have these conversations to what the law says that they have access to or should have access to, then I think we're doing ourselves a disservice. So let's read the preamble to the Constitution. We the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union, establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare, and secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity. We do ordain and establish this Constitution for the United States of America. The Declaration of Independence, paragraph 2. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights, that among these rights are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. His truth is marching on. Right?
Did anybody else think of Schoolhouse Rock when we read that?
So if you read those words and your heart does not get to pumping and you're not excited by those words, you need to see a doctor. Because these are the words that make up this great country. And I treat this country like I do my family members. I can talk about my family members, but you better not say anything about them. Right? So because I pay taxes and I vote, I can say stuff about this country. But if you don't pay taxes and you don't vote and you're not a member of the club, you don't have anything to say. Right? Because I love this country. But I also will hold her accountable for the things that she's promised. Now, the funny thing is, when people talk about the Declaration of Independence and they talk about the Constitution, sometimes people will say, well, Andre, when they wrote that Constitution, they weren't writing that for people who look like you. And I just smile. And I said, well, if they did not want me to hold them accountable to it, A, they should have never written it down. And B, they should have never allowed me to learn how to read. Because I'm going to hold them accountable to the promises that they've made to my ancestors and to me. All right? So context is important. So let's look at 1863, Emancipation Proclamation is signed. What does the Emancipation Proclamation do? Say it loud. Be proud. What does it do? Free the slaves. Free the slaves. Freed the slaves. What is a slave? It is a possession. It is a thing. From sun up to sundown were those things that pick cotton. 365 days a year, was it things that rolled tobacco against their will? Were those things? Were they? No, they were not things. They were people with dreams and aspirations and loves and fears and hopes that were dashed by the diabolical system of slavery. And so from today on, you can no longer say that those people that were in the system of slavery were slaves, because they were people first. All right? So they were people in the system of slavery. All right, 19th Amendment. What happens with the 19th Amendment to the Constitution? Women get the right to vote. They get a right to declare in this great democracy the shaping of their own destinies. I am woman, hear me roar. Right? So women get to start to declare their own destiny. 1924, the Indian Citizenship Act is signed, giving Native Americans the right to be American citizens. Pause for the irony. 1964, the Civil Rights Act is signed, which does what? It does what? It gives people equal opportunity. What people? Colored people? What people? All people. It gives everybody equal rights, right? And so part of the trick that you'll sometimes hear these political pundits talk about, they try to talk about affirmative action in some peculiar ways, and we'll talk about that as well. They try to talk about these equal rights being for a particular group. But if it's for a particular group, it can't be equal. Because equal means equal. Right? And so it gave everybody equal access. And I find it very interesting that the same folks who will need affirmative action are trying to dismantle affirmative action. But it'll be fun. Time will tell. Time will tell. Right? All right. 1978, Native American Freedom of Religion Act is signed, giving Native Americans the ability to worship as they wish. Huh. Good question, huh? Good question. All right. 1990, the Americans with Disabilities Act is signed, doing what for whom?
Forever.
Giving equal access specifically for people who have physical, mental, and emotional disabilities, but making sure that everybody can still push that button and open up the door. I really appreciate that. 8 years has been great for me. Let me just tell you. Right? All right. Context. So I want to talk a little bit about diversity, inclusion, and affirmative action. Affirmative actions are legal processes. And in legal processes, we pay more attention to impact than we do to intent. Right? So, for example, if I'm walking down the hall and a coworker swaps me on the butt and grabs, and we're not on the softball team together, what do we call that? Sexual harassment. And how does it get fixed? Who do I report it to? To the employer, to the human resource department, to my supervisor, and it takes us along this legal path. And if I'm not getting justification at that workplace, I can sue the individual. We go to the Supreme Court, and then I get paid. No, that's sue sometimes. Yeah, anyway. So then there are these programs that we undertake around diversity and inclusion. And in these particular situations, what we're mindful of is that it is the intent over the impact that is important. Right? So in our human relations work, it is the intent that's more important than the impact. How many of you have had an apology given to you that you know that the person really didn't mean, or they gave you a gift because they felt guilty? Right? How did you feel about that apology or that gift? Did you enjoy it? Did you appreciate? No? Okay. Yeah, I usually put that stuff on eBay. Yeah. So because it was the intention of the individual that in our personal relations are important. And so when we talk about that stuff, we talk about cultural competence, we talk about inclusive environments, and we talk about diversity education. So it's the personal aspects of our relationships that become important. And then lastly, what we also know is that human behavior actually changes human behavior. Laws and information does not necessarily change human behavior, but it's the relationships that people have that actually changes their behaviors. All right? And so we'll spend a little more time talking about that a little bit later in the presentation as well. What I'd like for you to do now is I'd like for you to, I just want to check my time so I can do a break. Let's do this. This will be a great time for a break. Let's take 7 minutes. Can we take 7 minutes for a break? And then we'll come back, we'll dive right in, and we'll keep swimming. All right? Thanks.
Question.
Yes.
First one. Okay. How can we say that that intent is more important than what we see coming out of government per se? Is there intention, but the impact is so bad, but they still rely on these programs and keep them in place because they're intent.
Yeah, because they twisted the whole thing. We should be holding people accountable for their impact.
Yeah.
In our personal relationships, it is our intention that is important to us. But we should be holding government and policies and procedures, all of the legal framework stuff, we should be holding them accountable to impact.
I want to clarify that.
Yep.
Thank you.
Yep, you're welcome.